Well, hello again. This is the 5th of January 2022, and recently I've been thinking about whether autism is in itself a disability. I've read a few different people's opinions on, why it may be or may not be, and I think there's a lot of factors at play. I mean, the thing is, the word disability is open to interpretation. I was going to say vague. It's not really vague, it's just open to interpretation. Can it be just anything about your body or mind that might make life a little bit more difficult than it has to be? In which case, probably the overwhelming majority of people are disabled to some extent. And yes, autism is definitely a disability. But on the other hand, there are also some traits that can be advantages or just appear as, standard personality traits. You don't have to be autistic to be to have social anxiety, for example, or to be a little bit kind of gauche and slow on the uptake, or a bit behind all the other kids in PE. It's probably why the condition was unknown for so long, and why so many of us get well into adulthood without even realising that's been the cause of all our difficulties in life. But yeah, there are because there are so many ways it can present, and so many traits that can appear mildly in some people and just be a bit of an annoyance, and sort of very strongly in others, and cause serious problems. As an example, interoception. That's sort of the understanding of what various sensations in your body mean. Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Are you tired? Do you need a wee, etc. If your interoception is slightly below average, you occasionally forget to eat, or your sleep patterns sort of slightly disturbed sometimes. It's maybe slightly annoying, but you don't have to be autistic to feel like that sometimes. But there are people who have that that particular trait to such an extent that it causes them some real difficulties. They end up, they could be incontinent. They could need sort of constant one-to-one supervision because they might accidentally hurt themselves. They need to be reminded that they need to eat, they need to have drinks, they need to do certain things at certain times just to keep themselves alive. In that respect, they are clearly disabled. I mean, personally, my personal opinion is that autism as a whole in itself can be a disability to some people some of the time, but isn't automatically. And I think a lot of it is how you yourself feel about it, and how the people around you respond to it as well. I did read a very interesting article a while ago by by someone who was arguing that, you know, the reason it exists, well, that neurodiversity exists, is because, you know, if you imagine, you know, back in the Stone Age, the dawn of time, we needed people who thought differently to others in each tribe, just to invent things, to be awake when others were asleep and guard the camp, to be able to hunt better. And if you imagine, you know, the sort of mind processes that today in modern societies might manifest themselves as a special interest. If you think back to, well, not necessarily think back to, something anyone can really remember, I suppose. If you imagine that kind of thought process going on in the mind of, you know, someone living in the Neolithic era, you know, maybe they would just become much better at lighting fires or flint knapping or gathering berries or sort of memorising the movement of animals than the rest of the tribe, and that would be an advantage, you know, so having someone who was an expert in something or who noticed patterns that other people didn't. And I think even, you know, quite recently, historically, things that are seen as disadvantages in the modern world, you know, sensory overload, for instance, you know, that is just not something that would have happened if, you know, you were living out in the countryside 100 years ago. There wouldn't be, you know, big noisy vehicles going round. There wouldn't be discos to go to. There wouldn't be sort of bright fluorescent lights everywhere you go and big crowds of people. You know, it's a lot of these things are only a problem because they are so common in the society we live in, or that they are currently expectations that people have of us. That aren't really, you know, naturally occurring. You sort of take for granted, but are you know, really quite recent developments in terms of human history. And I found that very interesting. And I mean, even in the modern world, there are autistic traits that are, you know, advantages. Things that we can do that, you know, are seen as being, you know, beneficial, in either to ourselves or to our colleagues or our families, whatever. For example, in my job, I'm a checkout assistant. Now, I am surprisingly good at memorising long strings of random numbers. You know, that is really useful in my job. So the ability to memorise and regurgitate obscure facts, you know, that's got me through some really good exams, you know, and quizzes and stuff. And I think, yeah, how would you describe that as a disability? I don't know. It's not a disability. I mean, there are, I suppose you could say, downsides to all of these things. You know, how you are perceived by others, you know, you're a bit weird. And some respond very negatively to that. But that, you know, that's more of a, you know, them problem. I wouldn't say it's a disability to have other people respond negatively to you. I don't know. Would you? I wouldn't. And the other thing that's sort of been, turning over in my mind as I've been pondering this question is, there are a lot of medical conditions that are sort of seen as a comorbidity. I mean, there's debate as to whether comorbidity is really a good word, because it kind of suggests that autism is in itself an illness, which it isn't. It doesn't have to be an illness to be a disability. Things like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, a lot of personality disorders, things like anxiety disorder, depression, various sort of mental illnesses of that kind, OCD, etc. And I do wonder as well, are these conditions things that just seem to manifest themselves more often in autistic people than the general population? Or is it because there is something about being autistic that makes you more likely to have them? Like, a lot of them are sort of stress related. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, neurodiverse people in general might have a harder time limping through life than your average neurotypical person. They're trying to fit in and make your way through the mysterious maze of making friends and finding a job and what have you. Then we seem to find a lot more difficult than others. And also things like sensory overload, just making day-to-day life a little bit more difficult than it has to be. It's just this sort of constant raised stress level somehow affecting our health in that way. I did hear a theory once that, the reason for a disproportionate amount of us have things like food intolerances, digestive problems in general, is because, a lot of us have sensory issue with food. We kind of live on very restricted diets. We don't necessarily have food intolerances, but the the act of eating something that is a food aversion actually makes you sick. If you're forced to eat something that you dislike or that you feel you have to eat, it could actually make you sick. I mean, if you do have, a diet that is sort of, affected by, a lot of food aversions, are you going to struggle with digestive problems? Because, there are so few things that you actually feel like eating. You're just not having a healthy, balanced diet. It affects your health. It affects the way your digestive system processes food. Could it be that? I mean, there's probably some people who are affected by these things, but I think, the issues that some people have are so serious that it's got to be, a bit more than just you ate too much of this and not enough of that. And people who do have sort of genuine allergies as well. they have serious reactions to various foods. That's not going to be made better or worse just by stress or by limited diets. Is autism a disability? Traits can become disabilities. In some ways, it is an advantage. Some traits can be an advantage. I think that in terms of whether we should be allowed things like disability benefits, should we be given carers? Should we be allowed disabled parking badges and things? I think all these things have to be decided on a case-by-case basis. I mean, simply being autistic in itself does not necessarily mean that you are seriously debilitated in day-to-day life, though some individuals are. Simply by their autistic traits. I know that there are a lot of issues as well around how you access services, how accessible services are, whether the tests to see if you are eligible for disability benefits are fair. There have been a lot of complaints about people who are clearly unable to work being declared fit for work. Again, if your particular presentation of autism is such that you're really going to struggle getting a job, then yeah, you need some benefits. Yes, you need to be be given some sort of support worker if you really cannot navigate day-to-day life by yourself. But not necessarily every autistic person needs that kind of thing. Or doesn't need them all the time, but might need them in certain situations or at certain periods of life. I mean, say we have terrible agoraphobia, it might come and go. It might be exacerbated by other autistic traits that come and go. And you don't have to be autistic to have terrible agoraphobia. It's but yeah, having some sort of support there, having some sort of therapy for that could be helpful. I've heard the word disabled as well. Disabled, short for differently abled, and it sort of sounds quite woolly. But because autism is such a very broad church, there are so many different ways to be autistic. We all have our own sets of abilities, difficulties, things that we can do very well, things that we're not so great at, things that we really, really struggle with. I think we do need quite a vague word to describe what it is. I'm not sure I really like disabled, though. It's I think it's a bit hard to describe. It just sort of almost sounds like a euphemism for disabled. I don't know, maybe there ought to be a word that we can all agree on that describes what we are. I mean, neurodiversity in general is, quite misunderstood by the general public, even by, neurodiverse people themselves. A lot of people, they don't realise that, it's not just about autism and attention deficits. Also things like dyslexia and dyspraxia that are sort of very specific issues that people might have. And don't have this kind of broad range of traits and presentations. Are we part of the disabled community? Again, I think that's sort of very much down to, each individual's set of circumstances and personal feelings. And also, what you're actually trying to do. If your dream is to have a really high-flying career, but your sort of interpersonal skills and your sort of emotional stamina and everything is such that you're just not going to do that, then yeah, you're going to find autism a big setback. If you sorry, cat's fighting again. If you're quite happy to sort of live by yourself, not particularly not put a huge amount of hours in at work and just sort of bumble along pleasing yourself most of the time, then yeah, it's not such an issue. If your family kind of have certain expectations that you're never going to fulfil, then yeah, it's a big problem. If they're much more understanding and accommodating to your own personal needs, then you aren't going to struggle so much. I think it really is down to each individual as to whether you find your autism a disability. And yes, that is my opinion on the subject. I think I'm just going to start repeating myself after a bit. So yes, give me any opinions you have in the comments. How do you feel about your own set of traits? Would you say they're disabling or a bit annoying or of benefit? And I'll see you next time.